My dad was also same-sex attracted, and throughout his time as a pastor, looked at pornography, and then eventually did interact with other guys. And it was after the 8th grade that he just couldn't do it anymore. He can only live a double life, for so long, and he left being a pastor. I was anxious. I was depressed. I didn't know how to relate to folks very well, and then I was beginning to see that guys were really a mystery to me. I didn't interact, in elementary school, middle school. I was kind of on the outside looking in. Now I have this sexual attraction. My body gets revved up, looking at other guys. Well, that's not really helping me feel like one of the guys either.
Kids that grew up in pastors' homes, we've met that either want nothing to do with God whatsoever or just really despise the church.
How can I grow and really see what God has for me in moving past these same-sex attractions? And one of the reasons that at that time it was really important to me as well is because my dad decided to go into the lifestyle as I was really needing to make a decision which way I was going to go as to whether to pursue a relationship with a woman or be single or whatever.
You're not going to just pray it away and poof, it's gone in an instant the way we all want it to be. But God, in the context of community, a new life in Christ that we could never have imagined if we will yield to Him, walk with Him in the company of some safe brothers and sisters.
I want to encourage guys that you have a lot to give right now. Even if you're just realizing that you have these attractions, if you've been struggling with it, for 50 years, if you've been looking at porn and acting out and doing stuff with guys, you know what? You have as much to give right now where you are as you would if you weren't struggling with any of that.
Well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you're tuning in through Love and Truth Network or through Transforming Congregations, we're just glad that you're here and that hopefully you've been watching some of these episodes over time. If not, go back and catch some. There are a lot of great interviews and some monologue as well, but mostly great interviews that we've done over the last year or so. And again, we're happy that you're here. I'm so happy that you get to meet a newer friend of mine, Jason Mellard. I met him at a conference where we were both ministering together and really loved his story, what I heard of it. And today he's going to unpack that for us a little bit more. And we'll just engage in our usual kind of Q&A back and forth and just discussion about relevant topics in the church and how God is still in the work of transforming lives over time and leading us into discipleship, regardless of what our struggles have been. So, Jason, we're so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we talked a little bit before we started recording here that the audience, whether they're watching or they're listening, they're used to hearing stories of how God has worked in people's lives. So all of our guests share a little bit of what life was like before Christ, how they came to Jesus, and then what is God kind of working on now? What does life look like after coming to Christ and this journey of discipleship for you? So we'd love for you to unpack some of that for us.
Absolutely. So what I would like to do is frame my story with the idea of separateness and oneness. Separateness versus oneness. I think that's a huge overarching story of the world. God came and created this earth and Eden. Adam and Eve were in oneness with Him, but then sin came in and there was separateness and we had to leave the garden. But what was beautiful is that Jesus left heaven, separated Himself from that, and then even more so when He was on the cross, separated Himself from that presence of God to take that sin upon Himself so that we could have oneness in Him. So as you hear my story, I want you to be able to pick out those pieces where Satan has tried to use separateness and God has come to use oneness. I grew up in a small town outside of the Dallas Metroplex, and my father was a Baptist minister. My sister and I were one of the few kids there, and really life was colored by the church. We lived in a home that was across a little footbridge from this ravine, and the church was on the other side. So that was pretty much our whole world. And my identity became the pastor's kid. But that
Oh,
was
joy.
about the extent of my identity, because a lot of who I was got taken away by my pastor, by my father, in our home through abuse. I'll just give a couple little scenarios. You'll understand some of what took place. There was something my dad liked to do that he called wrestling. He's like, Jason, this is what dads and sons do with each other. They wrestle. It's great. But his idea of this was, pushing me down on the ground as hard as he could, so that I could do nothing. It's like, come on, Jason, just come on. It was really ridiculous. I could do nothing against his power. That's not really what wrestling is supposed to be about, right? So,
right.
This would go on, and I just felt like, I guess I just don't get it. Something is amiss with me. I don't get this man thing. Using this as an example, felt kind of separate. And then another example, there was a freckle I had on my body in a sensitive area as a boy. My dad told me it was his freckle, and because of that, he got to touch me there. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense, when you think about it. Okay, here I am 5 years old, and my father is telling me something that I know it doesn't make any sense. But what do I know to do with that? And, that's something that separated me from truth. Here, what I thought was true, what I just felt as an embodiment of truth, that I have this body that's mine. Oh, yes. I guess maybe not. Maybe part of it belongs to somebody else. And then it separated me from really owning my body, owning who I was. So it was really a story of coming up with this real frail sense of who I was. And I got that by people pleasing, from the praise of the older ladies at church that said I was, cute kid that did things right. But yet I didn't know who I was. It was completely empty. I was crafting this little shell. My dad was also same-sex attracted, and throughout his time as a pastor, looked at pornography, and then eventually I did interact with other guys. And it was after the 8th grade that he just couldn't do it anymore. He can only live a double life, for so long. And he left being a pastor. And our whole family just crumbled apart. My sister went and did her own thing. My mom really didn't know what to do. I mean, her role was as a wife and making sure my dad was in a good place. And he was not in a good place, and so she wasn't in a good place. None of us were. And then I just felt like everything, came crumbling down. And I spent time trying to rebuild my life. But I was rebuilding this shell. I was rebuilding this frail little shell that wasn't even who I was, but yet I was picking up these pieces of, okay, I'm going to get this person to like me. I'm going to feel good about myself because of my appearance. I'm going to get noticed by somebody, whatever. And that was going to be how I was going to get back to normalcy and feel like I could handle life. But I was anxious. I was depressed. I didn't know how to relate to folks very well. And then I was beginning to see that guys were really a mystery to me. I didn't interact, in elementary school, middle school. I was kind of on the outside looking in. And that really led up until high school. So I was just focused on guys because they were a mystery to me. I thought I'm going to add to my shell talking like a guy is supposed to talk, going to move like a guy is supposed to move. I'm going to interact with women like a guy does. I'm going to wear the stuff that I'm supposed to wear. And that really made it difficult to live authentically in life.
Right.
And then, puberty hits. Guys are bored with each other at that point. They've been hanging out, playing for so long, and then women are growing into their femininity, and they're turning the heads of the other men, whereas I hadn't, looked elsewhere. I was still trying to figure out the man thing. And so when my emotions and chemicals and everything got released in my body, I think it just got affixed to the male image and got imprinted there. And I had that to add on to my feeling of separateness already. So now, okay, now I have this sexual attraction. My body gets revved up, looking at other guys. Well, that's not really helping me feel like one of the guys either. And in high school, I didn't really have a lot of strong attractions, or I wasn't very in touch with myself in that way because I had repressed a lot because of the sexual abuse when I was younger. It really wasn't until college that I started to experience a lot more of those attractions. And speaking of feeling other than and separate, I remember I walked into, this 40,000 student college thinking I am this small little person, and all these people, and pretty sure they know something that I don't know, because I am feeling very scared, very anxious, very unsure of how I just step forward, in life. I picked a major. I picked architecture because I thought it was cool. Didn't really know much about it, but I wanted to be cool, and it seemed like it was going to be something that really made me feel good about myself. And I do have really learned to love that. I'm an architect now, and it's really a beautiful thing. But I was scared. Doing something that's creative, it really takes courage to do that. You have to put yourself out there.
Sure.
And I didn't know how to do that. I remember one time sitting in our fine arts class, and it was the end of the semester towards the end, and the instructor was describing what the final project was going to be. And I just had this sense of fear, of anxiety. And I'm thinking to myself, gosh, Jason, it's been, all fall semester your freshman year that you've felt this way. What is wrong with you? Come on. And I know so much of that is normal, but this was really getting in the way of functioning. I looked over and I saw this guy in my class, and he was just kind of leaning back in his chair, a leg out in front of him, just seemed very comfortable, very relaxed, strong man. And I thought to myself, I think if Aaron was my friend, then I wouldn't have to be afraid. If he would look at me and smile, then I would know everything's going to be okay. Or if I could be confident like him, then I could take anything that life would bring at me. And so it wasn't him, it wasn't his body or whatever. And at that point, I really didn't have this huge sexual attraction towards him, but it was the idea that I could get something from him, that he was going to make me feel okay. He was going to make me feel safe. And that's all I wanted in life, was to believe that I was okay and that everything was going to be okay. Those two things. I've spent my life trying to get those two things figured out. And he was going to be somebody that could help me with that, right? And it seemed a little bit logical, like, okay, it's good to have friends that can help you out and all of that. But, it was later in that class, or maybe it was the next class, that he got up to leave. And I just remember this feeling of electricity just going through my body. I had looked at him, I had thought those things, and then all of a sudden I felt this feeling that I had never experienced to that level before. And maybe guys that are same-sex attracted, maybe they experienced that earlier on. But for me, that was really the time. And I thought, whoa, what is this? And I freaked out in myself, in my way I freaked out, back then, which nobody would know I was freaking out, of course. And I thought, well, this isn't good. What's wrong with me? Am I gay? If I could go back and talk to myself back then, and I would love to do this with anybody that's really realizing for the first time that, something is a little bit different. It's okay. It's okay. We live in a world that's not as it was meant to be. It's not. And you're just having a human experience. This is something that maybe you didn't ask for, didn't plan on, didn't suspect, but here it is. Don't panic. I wish I could tell myself, don't freak out. And I don't know, though, that I really would have heard myself, though, back then, if Jason from the future came and talked to me, because I was so just in it. Just the immersion of fear and anxiety and all of this, somebody telling me that's going to be okay. No, I don't think so. This feels pretty much not okay. I know that God is true. I mean, I know that God is bigger. I learned all this stuff when I was a kid. I accepted Christ at like the age of 5. But the problem was that God didn't feel real to me. It's very much not the case. And what felt real to me in that moment was that feeling of electricity, but even more so that feeling of fear. That fear was pretty strong. And so God has never felt that strong. So how could God be powerful enough to help me through that fear, to help me through that uncomfortable sensation that I had? I'm not going to turn to him. All I think is that he's just letters on a page in a book, is the reality of how he felt for me. So I just went and tried to do life on my own, just tried to figure it out. I went to a pastor locally in town there and said, I have these attractions. I don't know what to do. And he didn't really know what to do either. And I got the sense that, I think I'm just supposed to go and try to be a good Christian and, let this go. I did tell my parents, they weren't terribly helpful either. And I felt alone in it. I felt alone and separate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for me, I didn't go down that path of actually, being physical with a man. And the reason was, I guess there are 2 reasons. Is one, I did have an innate understanding or a sense that it was going to take me to a place that I wouldn't know how to get back from. I really saw a black hole there. I knew that I was trying to meet a need there that was just going to go layers and layers deep and not go anywhere. I mean, you can see the reason I wanted to be even just friends with him was because of fear and anxiety. Well, that's not a great way to start a relationship, or to bring into a relationship. I needed wholeness from God, oneness with God before I could be, one with anybody else. And then I was scared. I told you I had this shell around me of how I put myself together, and, going into the gay lifestyle was not a part of that. It was going to crack that open. And that was scarier to me than anything I felt like, the gay lifestyle might have to offer.
Right.
Yeah. So, I managed to kind of make it through college. I had some good times, made some friends. I did end up in the emergency room a couple of times by the time I finished grad school, and just due to nervous breakdown and depression, anxiety, that type of thing. And I found a group of folks that really was a powerful instrument from the Lord to me after I finished grad school here back in Dallas. And one of the guys in particular was a mentor who was just the face of Jesus for me. And he was there, present every time. He listened. He really empathized and got, who I was. And I started to believe, I am someone that is worthy to be known. I have something there that maybe other people would benefit from. I thought, there's this brokenness in me that's going to infect other people. If you get to know me enough, if you go deep enough, you're going to wish you hadn't, because you're going to be worse off for it. I know now that's not the case. I think in the book Living Waters, Andrew Kaminsky talks about that our brokenness is something that really can be a gift to others, because they are able to see it wrapped in God's grace and delivered. And I'm really glad to be able to have had that experience. And so I got kind of a footing. I got grounded in life, and wasn't anxious so much. And I really then decided, okay, I want to look more at the same-sex attraction stuff. I was just trying to survive there. But I had gone from, just wanting to be safe at all costs to, okay, how can I grow and really see what God has for me and moving past these same-sex attractions. And one of the reasons that at that time it was really important to me as well is because my dad decided to go into the lifestyle as I was really needing to make a decision which way I was going to go as to whether to pursue a relationship with a woman or be single or whatever. So, at that point, this was a couple of years after grad school, it really started to to do parallel tracks with my dad and I, and doing a significant life change. He decided to leave my mom. They agreed upon it so that he could go into the gay lifestyle and experience that. And I started going to Living Hope in Arlington, really an amazing ministry there, and met Ricky Shillette, who I know is a friend of yours. And I'll just kind of say, during that time for me and my journey, I'll talk about my dad here in a minute. It was honestly a magical time. You think of going to a group like that and being, scared, and somebody's going to know that I have this. And it was scary, but it was so freeing. I have to tell you that being able to walk in there and know that people just get you, they know me, they get me. That's such an appeal that my dad had, going into the gay community. These people really get me. I don't have to be something else. In your book, Garry, you talked about you weren't just coming out of the closet, but you were breaking out of jail. When you went into the lifestyle. And I think there's such a relief to be known, wow. So, my dad felt like he was being known in that direction. And I was very blessed to be known by this group of men at Living Hope. And I was there for several years, and I learned what real manhood was. And I was, of course, encouraged to develop strong relationships with guys at my own church and in different places, and really learn the value of community, vulnerability, openness, and honesty. And it's constantly pointed back to Christ. And that was the most beautiful thing, I think, about that ministry in particular, is that Christ was always primary, and everything else was secondary. After being there for a few years, I got to the point where I was just open for whatever God had. I really was more in love with God than anything else. And I didn't know what to do with my attractions. They hadn't been very strong. When I was less anxious and depressed and scared, attractions were a little bit more manageable. It's like, okay, not as big of a deal. I'm not trying to get something from, these guys or from pornography, which I chose to go into pornography and masturbation rather than acting out with guys. But again, it was that I really could enjoy what God had for me, and I knew that He had something better. But I could share with the guys in the group that I don't really see the appeal of kissing a girl. That's kind of gross. I don't know. I don't get it. But chuckle at it at the same time. And it was kind of that lightheartedness and just knowing that I didn't need that to go away. So I found that the more that guys need this to go away, the harder it's going to be. When you hold on so tight to something, man, it's not going to go. Yeah. And it really was amazing when one time during worship at Living Hope that this woman walked in and my head turned. And I saw something in her that was mysterious. She had actually been on the back row for many, times at Living Hope. I just hadn't paid her much attention before. She changed her hair. She walked in with, perm and came straight from work in nice clothes. And it was so cool to be able to have that experience of, whoa, I'm noticing this person and this is great. And we started dating, really enjoyed getting to know her. And I had a lot of those feelings that I always wanted to have, the healthy ones. It's not that I'm going to take these unhealthy attractions towards guys and feel like I'm fixed when I start having them towards women. It's completely different. And you say that too in your conclusion chapter of your book. It's just two different things. Yeah. Getting to know her was just beautiful. And, we ended up getting married. Ricky Shillette did our ceremony. We got 3 kids and really an amazing life. Not perfect by any means. My kids drive me crazy. Marriage is, God's used it to break me apart and put me back together.
It's refining, right?
Yes. Yeah. I still find that I go to my work for my sense of being a person that has value. But man, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, during that time, he distanced himself from the family, and it was really sad that while he said, "Okay, I'm going to be gay. I'm going to move forward in this direction," he just didn't have a peace about it. And I really think that you have if you take a lemon and you squeeze it, it's going to squeeze out lemon juice. No matter
Mm-hmm.
if you squeeze it over here, you squeeze it over there, whoever's squeezing it, that's what's going to
Right.
come out. And my dad,
Mm-hmm.
he just felt like he was alone all his life. He had this deep sense that he was different, and not just with the struggle, but in many different ways. And man, he came by it honestly. His dad really was not interested in him. His brother was not kind to him, and it's difficult, to be a pastor and to feel like you have to be a certain way. And I don't want to give him any excuses, but I empathize that he had it hard, and so he felt very separate. He felt separate again after he went to the gay lifestyle, and I didn't want him to feel that way. Gosh, I want good for my father, I really do, and it was beautiful when God gave me forgiveness for him, an actual feeling of forgiveness. I could say it in my mind that, okay, God, I forgive my father, blah blah blah. But I wanted more than that. I wanted a peaceful sense of it.
Yes.
And that's something I was willing to wait on God for as well. It was cool. One morning I woke up and I just thought, I wonder how Dad is doing today. And I just realized there was forgiveness that had happened, because I had really just thought, how is he doing? I hope he's doing well. But it was hard to see him withdraw from the family. He ended up withdrawing from God in his faith, and that was really the hardest part. He said, Jason, if God had created me this way, then why does he judge me for it? And well, it broke my heart when he told me that. And we didn't talk very often, but when we did, that was one of the things that he shared, and it was really hard to hear that, because I want him to have closeness with God. He knows the truth. He ended up getting in a relationship with a man, and I would go over there and spend some time with them, and he was friendly. And I just watched my father, though, pull more and more away. It was about 6 years ago that 6.5 that we started to reconnect a little bit more. Something switched, and he would call me like almost every day. Jason, how are you doing? Can we talk? It was really different from his usual MO. And we grew closer for a period of a couple months. And we went to Six Flags one time. It was funny because I have this really low car. He's a big guy. He has a truck. And I would think that we would normally take his truck. And he's like, no, Jason, you just drive. I'll sit in the passenger seat. That was really odd. I don't know what's going on. My dad wants me to drive and us to be kind of close together here. We even sat next to each other in those old carousel cars at Six Flags, those you're right next to each other and you're going along the track. My dad told me that night that leaving my mom was the worst mistake that he had ever made. And my reaction wasn't, okay, I told you so. Not at all.
Right.
I mean, I felt for him. It had been 10 years or more, since they had divorced and he had gone that direction. And I'm just like, golly, to feel that a decision you made and a path you've gone on is the worst decision you've made in your life, how alone you must feel. My heart just went out for him. And I don't know if that was because he didn't think he was gay anymore or thought that was wrong. He probably really dismissed having somebody that really cared about him and supported him and was there for him. I mean, oh my gosh, my mom was just a blessing in that way. So 2 weeks later, he took his life.
Sorry.
His boyfriend walked in on him as he was doing that. And my father, he said, I have to die. I'll be broke in a month. I have to die. I'll be broke in a month. I was puzzled over that for a long time. he had talked in those few weeks before about fears over money, and he had some health issues that were going to cost a lot. But there's no putting the puzzle together on reasoning like that. And of course,
Right.
he had seen psychiatrists and was working on stuff and had issues. But I really think separateness was something that did him in.
Yes.
He didn't feel like somebody had his back. Man, I would empty my bank account. There's not a lot in it, but I would give whatever I needed to for my father. Broken a month? What are you talking about? Now you've got a whole family here. You've got people that care about you and love you. No, right?
Yeah.
I just want to say, too, I know that God has a plan, for everything, but I haven't quite figured that one out. I've really missed him. I've really missed my father. And
how long has it been, Jason?
It's been 6 years. And a couple of years
Okay.
ago, after it had been 4 years, I thought to myself, wow, it's harder this year than it was the first year.
Oh,
I mean, maybe it was the shock at the beginning. And of course, you get busy with the practicals of the funeral and taking care of estate stuff. I think part of it is that he missed my son being born. I had 2
Of
kids. He
course.
had met, my 2 daughters, but he doesn't know my son. He's not here to even be a dysfunctional grandfather. I'd take that. Give me a little crazy sometimes, other than, if it's at least you being present here. So I think that was really something that, gosh, I just miss him. And I know, though, that God has been with me all the time. And it's just been layering and layering over the years to really believe that what God says is true, and he is what's good, and what he gives is what is good and what is best. And it's taken me a while to really believe that wholeheartedly and fully, but I know that is absolutely the case. And I'm very grateful to be a Christian and to be on this journey wherever God is going to take me next.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I mean, there's so many things that came to my mind as you were sharing that I wanted to loop it back around to. But one of the things, obviously, with your dad taking his own life, and also what you rightly started off with by talking about this separateness versus oneness, and how the enemy, it seems like one of his core tactics is divide and conquer, right? Get somebody away from the protection of community, get them away from the outside of kind of the camp of God. I mean, God is everywhere, obviously, but in terms of when we become lost, like, for example, I mean, part of what you're talking about is that your dad had people who loved him. I mean, your mom certainly, but you and others loved him. But the more that we wander away from God, the more that we get caught up in this loop of thinking that doesn't really include his body and the body of Christ, and also where we're having deep conversation with him, even in the midst of our deepest struggles and pain, we do start believing things that are simply not true. And then we act on those belief systems, especially when it happens over the course of time. And I mean, it's tragic to, the pathway that he went down, when actually there was plenty of opportunity around him for him to experience love and find a way back. That's, I mean, so many times you read my story, and there's stuff in there, but then there's other things that I couldn't even include. So many times where I felt like, I mean, God, is God going to take me back this time? I failed again. Proverbs says that a righteous man falls 7 times and gets back up again. And I'm like, oh, I don't need the 7 times. I passed that years and years ago, right? It's hundreds and thousands of times, it feels like, but God in this life is still available and longs for us to come back home to the shepherd, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what also in terms of just your experience, I know that I've had many conversations with Melissa in just over the course of our marriage, and even earlier from our marriage, where both of us have met and spent time with kids that are usually adult children that grew up in a pastor's home, and so many times there's been a rigidity, or there's been I'd say even to the point of kind of a form of spiritual abuse in the home, in terms of this kind of forced and constrained do's and don'ts of the Bible. And sometimes it's met with something like you experienced, where there was actual even sexual abuse and early sexualization happening. But then in addition to that, or besides that, maybe none of that's happened for many of them, but they just saw they witnessed a front row seat every day to the dichotomy and kind of the bipolar behavior of a man or a woman or both, who claim to follow God publicly and put on a good show publicly, but man, privately it was chaos, or it was just a lot of anger and rage and those kinds of things. And so many kids that grew up in pastors' homes we've met that either want nothing to do with God whatsoever, or just really despise the church. And what would you say to someone who may be listening like that now? Either they themselves grew up in a pastor's home or a missionary's home, or where there was vocational ministry going on, and they really wrestle with their relationship with God, or trusting Him, or trusting believers because of some of the early childhood developmental issues that they experienced growing up in that. Are there any thoughts that kind of come to you as one who can relate to a lot of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just want to start off by saying I'm so sorry, that you had that experience where you felt that dichotomy. Gary, I think even just with your father, you said, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but he's doing something different. And when you see that in a home that's integrated with the church, that really is a challenge, because we're learning these things
Right.
that are hard for kids to understand, like, okay, not to be lukewarm, but to be hot or cold. I didn't really know, what does that mean? But I knew I was lukewarm. I really had a sense of it.
Yeah, right.
Because I wasn't living fully, I was just trying to be a nice guy and please everybody. But, God is true. I just can't say it any other way besides the fact that it is true. What the Bible says is true, and that's where freedom is going to come from. Really, no matter what anybody has been through in their past, what they've seen, there's just no getting around the fact that God is big, and He is what is true. I think lots of challenging things happen in our life. It could be a dichotomy like that. It could be same-sex attraction, and those things feel, really big. But compared to Satan's pretty big and he's pretty powerful, so those get pretty small. When then you bring God up next to it, Satan's out of the picture. Ultimate power, infinity beats everything. And it's just a decision you have to make to allow yourself to move into that truth, and to let things go, but to learn from them and even use them to grow more.
Yeah. And I think in the letting of those things go, I think there's a process of, there are some things that we can actually surrender. There are some things that I do think, as we continue to grow up and mature in the Lord and in our emotional state, spiritual state, there are some things that happen that we're just like, what, I just don't even need to. I'm okay to just forgive and release that. But then there are other things, especially early on. It seems like for me, everything was hurtful. Everything was offensive. I just felt like every part of my skin, every part of my emotional skin felt sensitive to rejection or abandonment, or, I was just braced to anticipate it and try to, in some ways consciously, but I think in many ways unconsciously, to to do things that were self-protective to try to avoid the pain of what I was assuming would be coming. And so I was constantly tripping over my own 2 feet relationally. I was constantly kind of getting in my way, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of being abandoned, left, whatever. And it took time for the Lord to really bring about relationships where I could start to develop some good experiences that could, I needed some of that kind of under my belt a little bit to understand that, oh, these don't always have to end badly. Relationships aren't over just because you feel like you're no longer pleasing, or you've made a mistake or something, or you even blew it big time. That within the body of Christ, that's one of the beauties of forgiveness, both the confession of sin and the confession of wrong, and then to really receive a heartfelt and full forgiveness, and to experience, oh my gosh, like, our relationship actually got better after this thing that I thought would absolutely devastate it. Instead, it actually became better because of that genuine repentance and that genuine forgiveness that was extended. The economy of God is just so much more expansive and grand than anything that we could ever, really imagine. And I'm kind of going on here, I know, but one of the things I wanted to comment on too is that I had so much bitterness and anger toward God because he wasn't healing or acting in a way that I could perceive he was really on the move in my life. And in that lack of perception, I interpreted that as him not caring, him just treating me like a pawn on the chessboard of this, cosmic chess game that he was running. And instead, actually, the Lord was at work in my life, and the Lord was putting situations in place, but I also needed to cooperate with them. I needed to cooperate with him. I needed to kind of get off my high horse of judgment against God and begin to humble myself and look for the ways that he was moving, and to kind of open my clenched fist against him, to take a risk that maybe he wasn't the God that I had come to believe that he was. And it was in all of that life began to, there were some sudden moments of, genuine salvation at 23, but there were some sudden moments of God showing up in powerful ways in spiritual warfare and some other decisions I needed to make. But most of it was just opening myself up to what he wanted to do in my life over the long haul. What are your thoughts about any of those kinds of ideas or concepts?
Letting go, is something that is definitely easier said than done. So I'll start there maybe, because there was a lot of work that I did in that. I did approach my father and list off all the different abuses that he did to me after I'd gotten some counseling as an adult. And to your point of forgiveness really being something that can reconnect and help a relationship, it did benefit our relationship. And I knew that it was something that had to happen if I was going to keep having a meaningful relationship with him. And he owned it. He owned everything. He had done recovery work himself. One of the biggest things that he did offer me was openness, from the standpoint of being open about your struggles. He did do that. And he pointed me in different recovery programs when I ended up having a hard time. So that's one of the gifts that he did give me. Satan wants to target people that are doing work for God, and that would include pastors.
Sure.
I think it's okay to view people sometimes according to their intentions. My dad, he led people to the Lord when he was in the military. And, my mom, she would say, that was just the best time of his life. He had a group of guys, he would teach them the Bible, and, just see that expression on his face when he did that was just really when she fell in love with him. And he came to Dallas to go to Dallas Theological Seminary, and he wanted to devote his life, to giving to the Lord. And even if that didn't go very well, there's something there that I really want to be able to look at my dad and say, hey, he had this in him, that God gave him this love and desire, for the gospel, for sharing it. And while he did horrific things, I can see that part of him not only that part of him, but I can include that part of him in my view of him. And to me, that gives me more empowerment. I don't have to just look at my dad as somebody that abused me or hurt me. I can look at him with empathy. I can say, I'm sorry, that you wish you had not left, your wife, 10 years ago. Or I can look at him and see that that's not how he wanted to be as a pastor, and what he was doing in his own personal life. So, but I do think, there is a lot of spiritual abuses that happen, and it can be confusing. As a pastor's kid, I thought I had this certain role, to play. And when I didn't have a dad that was able to take me by the hand, and say, okay, this is what it's like to be a boy and a man, and we're in this thing together. And I was left to figure it out. And there's all this stuff about hearing from God. What does that really mean? My daughter even asked that, so how do I hear from God? And I'm able to talk with her about that, but nobody talked to me about those things, ironically.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I remember wanting to write as a kid. And recently I've been doing a lot of writing on my website, jasonmellard.com. I've been writing blog posts and really love doing that. But as a kid, I started to write a novel, and something in my mind, where I just got this thought of, no, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be going door to door and telling people about Jesus Christ. And so I didn't write more than a chapter of that novel, and that was the reason. But now, God is using my writing to bless him, to help people, get some freedom and maybe better perspective on some of the things that they're going through, maybe mainly focused on same-sex attraction. So one of the things that I got separated from was my potential, and that protection of being a nice guy and people pleasing and all that stuff. It really kept me from utilizing all of myself. God's given me my body, my mind, my energy. He's given me time, and how am I going to use that best for him? I was so focused on protection, self-protection. My two questions, am I okay? And is everything going to be okay? Well, it was 3 years ago where I had gotten past a lot of that, but I remember waking up and thinking, what could go wrong today, and how do I make sure nothing bad happens? And I was just like, I don't want to live that way. I want to go to work empowered, knowing that, okay, maybe something's going to go wrong. I'm going to get a call from a client. They'll be disappointed. But you know what? I can think about that differently. I can say, this is an opportunity for them to feel like I'm really hearing them, and I'm going to make this right. And they're going to feel more connected, rather than, oh no, somebody's unhappy with me. And so one of the things that I really want to offer guys is to be able to believe that there is so much more potential in them, because it can be that when our dads don't believe in us, or we didn't feel like we got that from the boys and our peers around us, that there really is so much more that we can do. I recently got certified as a high performance coach through the High Performance Institute, and they highlight 5 things that they believe really is something high performers do to elevate their life. And I think it's important to have this type of conversation, because God wants to do amazing things through us.
That's right. Absolutely.
But if we don't unlock some of those things, or know how to do that, or believe they're important, then we're really going to miss out on God, using us for his kingdom and doing so much more. So those 5 things, just real quick, and might sound kind of boring, and you wonder, what do they have to do with same-sex attraction? But it's clarity, energy, courage, productivity, and influence. But I want to give you a little analogy here, something to think about. So let's say, somebody like me is coming down a path, and we see this wall in front of us. It's this big stone wall. It just seems overpowering, and it's got SSA written all over it. Woo! Wow, what is this thing? I didn't plan for this.
Which stands for same-sex attraction, for anybody that's watching or listening that doesn't know what SSA means. Same-sex attraction in this case. Yep. Yeah,
man, I didn't expect this to come around the bend. Oh my goodness, I've got to get this out of the way. I have to fix this. I need to knock this down. Whoa, I've got some kind of plans. Maybe I don't know, fully what they are, but I'm moving forward in a direction here. And, when you see this thing as a wall that's so solid that you have to break down somehow, that it's a real obstacle, when you view it that way, then it is. Then you're not going to have the clarity to see forward in life of what a purpose is that God has uniquely created you to live out. You're not going to have the energy to go do amazing things because you're too busy pushing the wall and trying to get it to fall down. You're not going to have the courage to step forward because where are you going to go? To move forward because you're stuck with this huge thing over you. And who are you going to influence? If you're not able to move beyond and see it. But if you could maybe imagine, it's real. This thing that you're looking at is real, but maybe it's not as hard and solid as you think it is. I don't want to say, okay, let's just dismiss these feelings that we have because they're real, and we need to acknowledge them. We need to process them, ask questions, get curious. Maybe where did these come from, and what underlying needs could be there, and how can I move forward in an empowered way to meet those needs? But maybe it's just something that is not so solid. That actually maybe you push up against it. Maybe it's just some fog that looks like a big stone wall. And you can continue forward in your life, not pretending it was never there, but being able to live beyond it, to think I can still navigate these attractions. I can have this fog around me that looks pretty heavy, but it's not actually hurting me. It's not really affecting the pace I'm able to walk at. I can see enough to move forward. I'm going to address this, see where this fog is coming from, but I can see clearly enough to know that I have great potential ahead of me, and God is there, moving me forward into it. I just think we need to be able to separate the sexual urges from the thoughts that we're telling ourselves about them. Separate the situation from the story. My dad, he had these sensations, he had these attractions towards guys. That was hard,
Right.
But what was so hard is the story he told himself, that those attractions means that he's separate from other people. It means that he's different. He's got to be alone and navigate life himself. And I want to acknowledge that back then, people were not nearly as open about talking about homosexuality as it is now. So that was hard. We have it hard in a different way. That for me, when I decided to go into a heterosexual direction, I felt like I might be judged here, or maybe there's a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out. Is there something out there that really, I'm missing out on? But I am really enjoying the opportunity to give. And when you act in authentic manhood, you're really giving. I want to encourage guys that you have a lot to give right now, even if you're just realizing that you have these attractions. If you've been struggling with it, for 50 years, if you've been looking at porn and acting out and doing stuff with guys, you know what? You have as much to give right now where you are as you would if you weren't struggling with any of that. People need to see people go to God. That is the most beautiful thing. That's why I really would like to work with guys to be able to have a front row seat to see transformation in their life, to be able to see God at work. When I have been able to work with guys and have them experience freedom, whether it's in a small group I've been a part of, that it's been so cool to be able to get to know God more, just in being so close to him doing what seems to be the impossible. Not necessarily always changing somebody's attractions 180 degrees, but maybe lessening the intensity of them, definitely lessening the power that we let these have over us sometimes.
I love what you described in terms of the wall, because for so many of us, and no matter who is listening for us, you've had a wall. I mean, there have been different stages in our lives where, and it's not just one wall, it's usually kind of multiple walls over the course of time, where it may be same-sex attraction, or maybe it's an overactive opposite sex attraction. Maybe it's really having learned at a very early age to objectify others to gratify yourself, or maybe it's not really sexual stuff at all, or maybe it's kind of anti-sexual things because of abuse or because of other negativity. Maybe that's the wall that's there. I don't want to be in relationships. That if it weren't for people, everything would be great. Maybe it's that kind of a feeling or attitude, right? And so this desire to withdraw and isolate. We all wrestle with a variety of issues that feel just like what you were just saying, Jason, that feel like these monumentous, immovable walls. But God, God at work in us can make those things permeable, and it's not that it's without struggle. Where it does have struggle, and coming out of homosexuality is one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life, and surrendering that area of my life over the course of time and walking this out with Jesus. But my goodness, has it ever been worth the journey? For sure. Yeah. So whether a guy's listening to us or a woman's listening to us, and they are not identifying with the exact issues we're talking about with regard to same-sex attraction, fill in the blank, write on your own wall. What is it? What is it that you're facing right now? Because with God, that thing, again, you're not going to just pray it away and poof, it's gone in an instant the way we all want it to be. But God, in the context of community, is able to walk these things out with us in a way that matures us and grows us over time, and to give us a new life in Christ that we could never have imagined if we will yield to Him, walk with Him in the company of some safe brothers and sisters. Whole enough. I love, you talked about Living Waters. We're huge. We love Living Waters. We love Andy and the whole team over at Desert Stream Ministries. That's where my wife and I actually met, was at a Living Waters training back in 2004. And we've been involved in that ever since. And the language that he uses is being whole enough. No one is completely whole, but as parents, as Christ followers, as friends, we can become whole enough that we can actually become good gifts to one another in every way. And that's so encouraging, I think, for those who feel like they're worth nothing. And that certainly is where I was at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just incredible how Satan can take something and make it bigger. Think of like a balloon, beach ball, and maybe the actual plastic you buy it from the Dollar Tree, and it's kind of all folded up, and maybe that's the struggle that you're having, and that's hard, But then Satan blows fear into it, he blows anxiety, and he blows all these lies into it, and then it gets really big, and then you try to push it under the water, and you're killing yourself trying to do it. So it really is hard. One of the tools I created recently is ssaquiz.com. And it's something that, guys can go and ask them questions about their attractions, and really to be able to understand how much are your attractions the issue, or how much is it that your view of them is the issue? Are you allowing them to affect, how much sleep you're getting at night, your relationships with other people? Are you, limiting your social activities because you feel like you're different? Are you not going to the gym because you feel uncomfortable being around guys in that way? And I just think an awareness is often really powerful for that. And then to be able to provide tools to say, here's some ideas of things that you could do a little differently, or how you could look at this differently, to be able to get centered enough that you can then go through the process of navigating the attractions in a way that is empowering, to go back and look at your childhood, things that maybe were going on. Look at that feeling of isolation you felt, when you weren't picked until last, for the team in PE.
Routinely.
All those things, all those things are so important. And I've cried tons and tons and tons. I just want everyone to know that I have shed tears, but they have been real productive. I think there's a difference between clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is really feeling this deeply and processing it. Dirty pain is, I shouldn't be feeling this in the first place, and so I'm angry that I'm feeling this. That's fine, but or shame over feeling whatever. It's like, okay,
well, and dirty pain or
see if we
shame
can take that
doesn't
away.
lead us out. It doesn't lead us out,
Yeah.
right? It only further entraps us in our belief system and separates us again. Isolates us, separates us from the real solution. So, hey, Jason, I'm so glad that you brought up your website and a couple of other resources. So, and you mentioned coaching as well. How can people get a hold of you or follow you? Where would you best? And if you have several different, you mentioned a couple of different websites. If you have several different ways, by all means, share them with us here.
Yeah, absolutely. So jasonmellard.com, and you can subscribe to my newsletter there. Every Friday, I'll post a link to the most recent blog that I'm putting forward. I'm really doing these blogs based on an outline of a book that I'd like to craft called Own Your Identity, Live Beyond Your Same-Sex Attractions and Into Your Purpose.
Love it.
Yeah, and go to ssaquiz.com. It directs you back to my website, to a page there, and take that, and I think it could be empowering for you. Right now, I'm just on Facebook, but I hope also to move into other social media outlets as well.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the fact that you took time out to spend with us. I just want to make sure though, as we're getting ready to wrap up here, are there any last thoughts that you feel prompted you want to share with anybody beyond what you've already mentioned to this point?
I would say you just don't limit what's possible. I'd say that for anybody, because I just couldn't imagine my life as it currently is, imperfect, whatever, but I just didn't have a frame of reference for it. A lot of it was I was asking the wrong questions. What do I need to do to fix this? What do I need to do to be okay? But what do I need to do to have an abundant life where I really experience God? What do I need to do to be open to let God in, and just sit with that question for a bit? I might just offer that as a closing, just sit and ask God, what do I need to do to just be open to receive whatever you have for me? And just pause and really be quiet with that, because I guarantee you it's going to be something that'll blow your socks off.
Yeah. Well, and as you say that, the other thing I'm reminded of is we talked a little bit about Living Waters, and actually our Living Waters team is coming over tonight for dinner and just some planning and prayer around the future. And I say that really to, again, highlight and high five the work of Andrew Comiskey and the ministry team at Desert Stream and the program of Living Waters. But in addition to that, also just to say, it doesn't matter how long Melissa and I are leaders, that you're a leader in some fashion. God wired us for community. God wired us for deep and intimate connection. And so often we confuse the word intimacy with sex in some fashion, but really intimacy emotionally, intimacy where we have our brothers and sisters, this band of brothers, this band of sisters, the body of Christ around us. And it's not 200 people, but it's a few, right? It's the consistency of knowing that we're a part of a group where we're not the project, but we are a part of that group. And so one of the beauties of being a leader in Living Waters and having the team over and things like that, we just can so easily and quickly enter into meaningful conversation, enter into going deeper right out of the gate, entering into prayer for one another so easily. And there's no shame in sharing we never want to share sinful things or failures or whatever, but we need to. And the rhythm of that is something that I know that I'm going to need for the rest of my life. And that's not because I'm uniquely broken. It's because what God has called us to. So I love what you're sharing. And I would just encourage you, those who are listening, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. But definitely seek out Jason Mellard and go to his website, jasonmellard.com, and look at the resources there and just, again, glean from his wisdom, his experience. And we're glad that you are here. We hope that you'll tune in again for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Bless you, Jason. Bless you for being here with us as well. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or watch future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. Also, you can subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future episode.